Sometimes you just end up with some small offcuts of wood that are just too pretty to throw away, or you just want to try and make something unique out of them. So we're going to show you how to make some simple little boxes. Nothing fancy, nothing exotic, but just simple little boxes that you can make up very quickly. And it's also going to give us an opportunity to show you a couple of different things along the way. Now we of course have to start out with our stock prep. I've got 4 different species of wood here: cherry, maple, walnut, and some curly red oak. Now what we want to do is get this down to a thickness that's suitable for a small box. Oh, I'm figuring these things will be about 3, 4, maybe 5 inches tall and a couple inches square. We don't really care what size they'll end up being, but we know that they're too small to be made out of 3/4 inch thick material. So what I'm going to do is get this material down. We'll probably plane it down somewhere around 3/8 of an inch, and we'll kind of see how it feels at that point. Now this cherry board that I've got is really wobbly. It's got some, everything's wrong with it. It's just simply not straight anywhere. So we're going to have to start at the joiner with this one and get one surface qualified so that it's flat and straight. Now this piece of silver maple that I've got has got some curl in it. It's not real pretty in color, but it's got a lot of tear out on it, and that's probably due to the figure in it. And depending on how it cooperates with me or how much it fights with me, I may show you a trick with a plant mister that'll help solve some of that problem with tear out. Now at the joiner, oftentimes you'll see us use it with the board against the fence this way, and what we're doing is squaring up this edge to the face that's against the fence. But the joiner also works great for making one of the surfaces flat. Now of course this is a perfect example of when we want to do that. This board's got cup, warp, twist, you name the defect, it's got it. Now at this point it's curved this way and it's twisted where my high spots are at this corner and this corner. Now, if I were to just take and start whittling away at this end, like so, it's going to want to actually kick back on me a bit. Now, at this point, when I put it over the middle of the cutter, right here, I'm about, I'd say a good 1/16 of an inch above the cutter head. And what I want to do is work down these high spots at the ends first. So I'm going to come in like so, drop it down, feed across, swap it end for end, drop it down, feed across, until I start getting a reasonably flat area at the ends of the board. Once I get, maybe this much of the area that's reasonably flat, then I'll start working across the entire board going across the jointer. Now I have to be very careful when I'm doing this. When I'm feeding it across there, if I push down real hard with either my hand, which isn't the recommended way, but with your push block, in this case of course I'm using my grippers, if I push down really, really hard, I'm holding that board flat against the jointer's face. That isn't going to solve anything, because all I'm going to do is just put a nice smooth finish on the warped board. So it requires a bit of feel, and with the jointer turned off, you can kind of get that feel to see how much pressure down you can put without deforming or flattening the board, so that you can get enough force to push forward, enough force to hold it down, to feed it through, but without pushing the board flat against the table's surface. So what we really want to do is, so to speak, float it across that cutter head to remove those high spots and leave the board in its naturally twisted state. So it's a bit of an involved process, and it takes a little bit of practice, but it is definitely something that you'll want to master very soon rather than later. Now at this point, the board has still got some twist in it. I've really made no effort to get rid of the twist by starting in the center to work out. All I've really done was taken off those high spots. Now what we need to do, as mentioned before, is start at one end, feed all the way across. But because this board has twist in it, I cannot allow the board to rock or twist as I'm feeding it across. I have to pick one plane start out, we'll say one angle or plane, depending on how you want to look at it. I have to start out with it in one orientation, feed it across all the way, and I cannot allow it to twist during that motion. That's when we'll start to take the twist out of it. At this point, I've taken some of the cup out of it. Now at this point, the board is flat on this face, very flat actually. There's no cup, warp, or twist. It sits on my jointer's bed nice and flat. Now at this point I can go right into the planer and get it to thickness. After the first pass through the planer, I noticed that the tear out is still there and it's still continuing. So what we're going to do is try an old trick that I've been using for a couple years now, and it seems to work out real good. I'll just wet the wood. Let that soak in a little bit, and then we'll pass that through the thickness planer and see if we can't contain some of that tear out. Because as you can see, the board's got a fair bit of curl to it. It's not the most ugly piece of wood in the world, but it's worth saving, I think. And the plant mister seems to have done the trick once again. Now we will be bevel ripping these, so get rid of your zero clearance insert plate, go to your stock one. That'll allow you to tilt your blade. And as you can see with the material that I have on hand, it's all different widths. I'm just going to rip them to get the maximum yield that I can out of each of the pieces. Again, no need for dimensions here. But one thing that is important is you want your miters to meet up real nice and tight at the edges. Now I will admit, with a clear drafting triangle, it's much more difficult. If you can get a colored one, a dark gray one or something, it might be a lot easier to use. You can, of course, set up your bevel ripping operations with the fence on the left or the right side of the blade, depending on which way it tilts and so forth. I do it both ways, and I've had great success in both conditions. As always, though, I do like to make sure I maintain good control of the work as I'm feeding it through. Now, as I mentioned, I don't really care what my width is. I'm just going to maximize the yield of the stock, so I'm just going to bevel rip one edge, turn it around, adjust the fence over a little bit, bevel rip the other edge, and whatever the width is what it's going to be. Now what I want to do is cut off each of the pieces to their overall length to make up the sides of the box. Now because of the various widths that I'm working with and the overall length of the rough material, I have to just simply select what'll work. I'm not overly concerned about scale, proportion, or any of the fancy stuff. I'm just having some fun to make some boxes. So I'll start out with about a 3.5 inch for a couple of them, and you may adjust from there. Now we need to cut a groove along the bottom inside face of our little boxes to hold the bottom in place. Now to do that, I'm just using my standard saw blade, 1/8 inch kerf. I've got it set about 3/16 of an inch away from the fence, and I've got it raised up 1/8 of an inch. I'll just pass each of the pieces over, and that'll give me the dado to capture that bottom piece. Now because I ripped all the material to width first and then cut them to length, I know my boxes are definitely square because they're all the same width, or all four sides are the same width. Now what we need to do is figure out how big to make our bottoms. Now you can of course assemble it together with some tape and then just measure it. Of course I always use my dial calipers, adding a total of 1/4 inch in both sides for the bottom width. Or you can take just the side, measure your inside width, like so, across the narrow side of the bevels, and then add 1/4 of an inch there. A little bit less so you got some clearance for the bottom. And then as a double check, you can come across this area where your groove comes out onto the bevel and measure that area as well. And that'll give you a real good gauge as to how big to make the bottom. You just need the bottom big enough to fit in there so it doesn't fall out. Now for the actual bottom, I'm using some oftentimes referred to as aircraft plywood. It's sold in the craft and hobby sections where they have toy models and that sort of thing. It's a little bit less than an 1/8 inch thick, so having an 1/8 inch kerf cut from my saw blade, it fits in there just about perfect. Now all we need to do is just cut it up into the sizes for each of our bottoms, and then we're ready for some assembly. Then after you get your bottoms machined, dry fit them in there, make sure everything will fit up nice and snug and that the bottoms aren't either too big or too small. And then it's just a matter of some glue and tape to finish the project up. Don't get too carried away with the glue. These are just small decorative boxes. You're not going to be parking a Buick on top of it, so you don't need all sorts of fancy joinery and feathers and all that sort of thing. And then for clamping, pretty tough to beat tape for these mitered corners like this, although it can be a bit of fun trying to get it on the first time around. After you get everything detail sanded up nice, apply your favorite finish. And as you can see, by these construction techniques, you can get very tight miter joints, a great looking corner on all four edges, and even with that sapwood on this cherry, the box still looks real attractive. And of course, you can use a variety of stains or really anything you want to dress up these simple little boxes.